As many of you would know, I'm always on the hunt to find some of the best value for money gear on the market, specifically aimed for travelers, campers and caravanners. Now I'm always looking out for gear that is compact, lightweight, and is something that is going to improve my outdoor experience without making it overly complicated. Now a chainsaw might not seem like an absolutely necessary tool, however, it does make life a lot easier if you're trying to remove a tree from a blocked track or just collect enough firewood for a night at camp. Now, as someone who spends a fair bit of time on the road, I'm not looking for a huge saw to cut huge logs, but just something a little bit more practical, manageable and compact for occasional use and stored in a confined space. In today's video, I'm going to be looking at Ryobi's 18-volt 12-inch battery-operated chainsaw. I'm going to have a look at some of the features in detail and conducting some tests to see whether or not this is actually going to be a useful and helpful tool out camping, or whether or not it's just another cheap plastic toy. So firstly, I want to find out whether it's going to be a good option for campers and caravanners, and secondly, whether or not it's actually going to be a viable option to replace the more traditional petrol saw. Today we're going to be having a look at the physical dimensions of this unit, including its size and weights, some of the features. We're going to be conducting some tests, including a speed test and a noise test, and seeing how long the battery will last. We're also going to be checking out the maintenance schedule and looking at some chain sharpening tools and techniques, as well as focusing on some travel orientated accessories to make life out on the road just that little bit easier. Now I have broken this video down into segments, so if you're interested in a particular area, have a look at the timestamp down below and you can skip straight to that section. Otherwise, let's hop back in the car, head back to the garage and take a closer look at this unit. So this is Ryobi's 18-volt 12-inch chainsaw, one of the many tools in the Ryobi's 18-volt 1 Plus range, and can be used with a number of batteries offered by the manufacturer. The 12-inch bar is recommended to cut up to 250mm thick timber, and claims it can cut 40 100mm cuts with a single 5 amp hour battery. Ryobi's toolless chain tensioning system and automatic chain oiling design makes this a simple and convenient tool to use at home or in the bush. So let's start with some of the physical dimensions of this unit. And this is one of the first things that attracted me to this particular make and model. A lot of battery operated saws in the market these days are quite long and stretched out, but Ryobi efficiently designed and built this unit to be compact. The Ryobi measures in at 695mm in length, 200mm in width and 250mm in height. The tool alone weighs 3.3 kilos, and with a 6 amp hour battery, it comes in at 4.1. Now those who are relatively new to chainsaws or perhaps haven't owned one before need to know that a 12-inch bar is measured from end to end, including that portion behind the plastic cover. This means that in reality, we only have 10 inches of bar and chain exposed for our cutting surface. An important part of any tool is the balance. A well-designed and manufactured tool will be nicely balanced to reduce any fatigue experienced by the operator. This Ryobi unit sits well in hand and is nicely balanced with a regular sized battery. On the left side we have the brushless motor housing, bar oil filler point and battery connect areas, creating a slimline design. The handle incorporates a trigger safety activated by the thumb of the trigger hand and is easily manipulated. The right side contains the chain guard and toolless chain tensioning system, and the front of the saw houses a plastic flat plate with plastic grab spikes near the bar. On top of the saw we have a solid grab handle and there is a plastic guard. This hand guard does act as a chain brake, meaning that if the saw were to kick up towards the operator while in use, this guard is pushed forward and instantly stops the blade from spinning, hopefully reducing any injury. The base of the saw is simply flat and the plastic housing meets together in the middle. There are ventilation slots for the brushless motor, which appear to be well out of the way from dirt and debris off the bar when in use. Now if we compare this unit to a similar sized petrol chainsaw, we can see the physical size difference. This here is a Stihl MS181 two-stroke saw, and aside from the obvious larger dimensions, also comes in at 5 kilograms. Although the unit is larger, this is the third smallest petrol steel saw manufactured, with the second smallest engine, so it'd be fair to say that it is designed to be compact and portable and would fit into the same category. Overall, the Ryobi has a very plastic feel about it. There are very few removable service covers due to that electronic driveline and very basic operator controls. It really couldn't get much simpler than this, but coming in at only 3.3 kilos, it sure is a very compact and lightweight unit. One of the features of this Ryobi saw is the brushless motor. This Ryobi unit houses an 18-volt DC brushless motor, which in itself has many benefits over regular electric motors. Brushless motors are renowned for their higher torque levels, higher efficiency, increased reliability and product longevity, along with reduced operational noise. Providing the motor can handle some of the tests that we have planned for it, the brushless design will certainly give it an advantage. Another huge attraction to this particular saw for me was the toolless chain tensioning system. Now, carrying extra parts or specialty tools on the road can become frustrating, not to mention the risk of losing them while out and about. The fact that Ryobi have managed to incorporate this into their side cover and not requiring any additional or specialty tools is a huge advantage. Keeping the correct tension on a chain is vital. A chain that is too loose or too tight will create premature wear. Altering the chain tension on the Ryobi unit could not be simpler. We loosen off this center bolt on the right hand side, and this will allow us to turn the outer grey ring. Turning it clockwise will tighten and counterclockwise to loosen. Once we have the correct tension, retighten the center bolt and we are ready to keep cutting. In the case of the Stihl, they have designed this purpose-made tool called the scrench, a screwdriver cross wrench. We use the large socket to undo a nut and then use screwdriver end to make the adjustment on the chain. Once correct, the socket can then retighten that nut. Now, tensioning the Stihl is not a hard process by any means, but it's just another tool you have to carry around and add to your gear. This brings us on to maintenance. Now, unlike a petrol saw where you have regular engine services, air filter and spark plug replacements, the electric saw is relatively maintenance free. The Ryobi features a sealed brushless motor which doesn't have any scheduled maintenance requirements. In fact, the only thing we really need to do is just to clean this unit from time to time. Like any chainsaw that has an automatic bar oil feed, it requires clean and open channels between the oil reservoir and the bar. A clean after a few batteries worth of use won't go astray to ensure that oil feed doesn't block up. We can further remove the chain guard piece to access the rear of the bar and remove the chain. This gives us plenty of room to inspect and clean the working parts. It doesn't matter whether you have a petrol saw, an AC powered saw or a battery saw like this one here, one thing you'll still be required to do is maintain that chain. Now, the amount and frequency that you have to service the chain will depend on the type, quality and the density of the wood you're cutting. But generally, keeping your chain away from sand or bark covered logs while cutting will help prolong the life. Now, when it does come time to sharpen your chain, there are a couple of methods to do so. Firstly, we need to understand how and which part of the chain we service. Here we see the bar on the bottom of the screen, and these pieces here are called the tie straps, which are riveted to hold the chain together. The pieces under the chain are referred to as the drive links. This piece here is a depth gauge, which is placed immediately in front of the cutter. Now, each cutter has its own depth gauge, and the cutters are positioned in opposing directions. We need to sharpen each of those cutters to ensure they have a sharp blade on the upper leading edge. The depth gauge ensures the cutter doesn't hook onto too much timber and bog down. And we also note the cutter is angled downwards, so as it wears over time, it reduces in height. This means that we also have to adjust these depth gauges downwards to allow the correct cutter exposure. The first method to sharpening a chain is to use one of these electric chain sharpening stones. Similar, I guess, to a miter saw, the chain is positioned in a guide and adjusted to the correct angle, in this case 30 degrees. The chain is clamped into position and we simply pull the stone down to sharpen the leading edge. We continue through each cutter like this, switching the angle across to finish the opposing cutters. Now, personally, I prefer using the Stihl 2-in-1 sharpening tool. The tool contains 2 round files and a center flat file along with 4 guide rails. The guide rails sit upon the nearby cutters while the round file sharpens the cutter in the center and the flat file brings down that depth gauge at the same time. The chain can be left on the saw for this method, and I find it much easier to place it into a vise to hold it steady. I push the tool through each cutter 4 times, pushing it towards the sharpened leading edge. Once all of the cutters on one side have been completed, the tool can be flipped over and the opposing cutters sharpened. This method is quick and easy once familiar. The size of those files will depend on what type of chain you're running in your saw. Now, for me, in both my Stihl saw and in this battery operated unit here, I'm using a very common 3/8 chain. This is a very common chain for a small chainsaw, and there's plenty of places you can pick up spares or replacements, and I'll chuck some links in the description below if you're interested. Along with the features I've already mentioned, the batteries I can use with this saw were another huge attraction to me. Firstly, the fact that Ryobi used their 18-volt 1 Plus range of batteries for this unit meant that I can use any 18-volt battery from Ryobi on this tool. Whether it be one of my old 5 amp hour batteries from 5 years ago, or the new high-performance 18-volt 6 amp hour battery purchased with this tool, they will all fit and all work with this saw. Now personally for me, I do find the 6 amp hour high performance batteries the best overall for performance, battery life, but also to keep the unit nice and compact and retain that factory design balance with the tool in hand. In addition to this, I already own a bunch of tools in the Ryobi's 18-volt 1 Plus range, and this means that when I hit the road full time, I'll only need a couple of batteries and a single compact charger to power all of my tools. Ryobi offer several chargers for their units, from single units to power stations, regular chargers and fast chargers. Again, for me, in order to retain a compact design, I've decided to purchase this standard charger, which is definitely not the fastest, however it's nice, small and lightweight. I'll be the first to admit that Ryobi are not the market leaders in portable power tools. However, I've had a large range of their tools now for a number of years and had very few issues. What Ryobi don't have with those market leaders, they do make up for in range. The Ryobi 18-volt 1 Plus has the biggest and broadest range of tools in the industry, and you can buy just about anything to work with these batteries, from drills, grinders and saws to inverters, handheld cultivators and misting fans. You name it, and Ryobi have probably built it to work with their 18-volt 1 Plus range. This brings us on to battery performance. And a unit like this is a power-hungry device. It's going to be no good for us if it can't power up for long enough to be useful. Now, as mentioned, I generally use these high-performance 6 amp hour batteries, and this brings us on to our first test. The first test I'm going to conduct today is to see how long this saw is going to run with no load with one battery installed. I ran the saw on a fully charged 6 amp hour battery without any load until the battery gave out, and we get a total of 46 minutes and 6 seconds, along with a whole lot of oily mess. Now that is a long time, but there is no doubt and no denying that adding some load to this chain is going to dramatically reduce that battery life. But saying this, we should recognize that you're never realistically going to run the motor for 45 minutes straight without a break, and it has shown that the motor is somewhat resilient and reliable in that regard. So further to that, I took a few temperature measurements from the saw immediately after it stopped, and we see 43.7 degrees on the top edge of the bar near where the drive links run through, 28.3 degrees on the brushless motor housing, and 30.3 degrees on the battery itself. Now these temperatures are fairly impressive considering they've just come off a saw that has been running for 45 minutes non-stop. But now we've depleted the battery, it's time to figure out how long and how much power it requires to charge them back up again. But first of all, we've got to allow that battery to cool down. If you place the battery onto the charger directly after use, you'll see the red light flashing and there'll be no charge provided. But once we've allowed the battery internals to cool, we set up our watt meter to measure the power required and the time it takes to recharge this battery from empty to full. The clock at the top of this meter commences when the power is drawn and will stop once the battery is fully charged, giving us a total time taken, and the center number here is the amount of watts being drawn at the present time to charge this battery. The test is completed and we see they took a total time of 3 hours and 38 minutes to fully charge this 6 amp hour battery. In addition to that, we also note that it is required a total of 134 watts and its highest power demand was only 45 watts. Now that sure is a long period of time to charge up one battery, but let's note that Ryobi do not advertise this particular charger as a fast charger. They do have other chargers that are alleged to run a much faster charge time. However, as mentioned earlier in the video, I chose this particular unit because of its small and compact size. In addition to this, as the power draw is only low at 45 watts, this would mean that if your vehicle is fitted with a low powered factory inverter like the 200 series or the Prado 150 series are, then you can easily charge this battery from your vehicle while the ignition is switched on. What about the cost of a unit like this? Now, it goes without saying that prices are always changing, so you need to check at the time you're watching this video. But as of current 2022 pricing, this chainsaw goes for about 269 Australian dollars, but that's just for the tool only and no batteries. So unless you already have some of the 18-volt 1 Plus range, you'll also be required to pick up one of the chargers and also at least one battery. This is going to set you back another $79 and this $169. So you're looking at a total startup cost there of about $517. Comparing this to a petrol store, the Stihl MS181 costs $489. Now add about $30 of two-stroke oil and that brings it up to $519. What this shows is that both of these setups have almost the exact same startup cost. But is one better than the other? Well, yes and no. They each had their own distinctive advantage. So let's see what that is. Now it's all well and great talking about the specifications here in the garage, but it's time to pack these saws up, head on out bush and do some real world testing. So as I prepare these saws, I should let you know that neither of the chains on these units are brand new. Both of these saws have been used previously, however both chains and cutters have been sharpened using the same method, giving us the most consistent result. We are also going to be using the same bar oil on both units today, and obviously we'll be using a fully charged 6 amp hour high performance battery on the Ryobi. We're out here in the southern forests of Western Australia, and this area is known for its jarrah hardwood. Now jarrah is a great wood for burning due to its density and its clean and slow burning properties. So I found this log here, which is relatively similar in diameter throughout and elevated off the ground. So it's going to be the perfect test piece today to conduct a performance test between the Ryobi battery saw and the two-stroke saw here. So the way in which I'm going to conduct these tests today is I'm going to be cutting 3 cuts through the log on each of these saws, and we're going to compare the time and how long it takes to get through this log. Now I will say this log is a big size and it's probably a little bit bigger than you would use for either of these saws, but particularly for the battery saw. But we're not here to make this test easy. So let's get cutting and see what happens. We're going to start with the Ryobi battery saw. There's nothing to it, simply pull in that trigger and wear away. We can see the Ryobi has no problem in making its way through this wood. I've had to angle the saw a little steeper than I normally would, as the shorter bar doesn't quite make its way through the width of the cut on a horizontal plane. The first cut sees it completed in only 42 seconds. Let's see how cuts 2 and 3 compare. Cuts 2 and 3 came in at 42 and 45 seconds respectively, giving us a total of 2 minutes and 9 seconds to complete the 3. Let's set up for the same test, this time with the Stihl 2-stroke saw. With the engine warmed up and ready to go, the test starts again and the chain is able to cut through the wood relatively easily. I'm able to maintain a more horizontal position on this chain with the longer bar. The first cut ripped through in only 40 seconds, 2 seconds faster than that of the Ryobi. Cuts 2 and 3 came in at 37 and 40 seconds respectively, giving us a total time of 1 minute and 59 seconds for all 3. There we have it, the Stihl saw was able to push through just a few seconds quicker on each of those test cuts. That Stihl petrol saw was able to use the 2-stroke engine just to keep that RPM a little higher, and it probably was an advantage with the bigger bar, particularly with a size of log this big. Now realistically, we're not really going to use the battery Ryobi saw to cut through something this large and this dense. However, we can see from that test that the results were still very comparable, which is quite impressive given the different technology on each of those engines. Now although the Ryobi was that little bit slower per cut, realistically it's going to give us plenty of firewood out in the camp, and it's definitely going to cut through those trees crossing the track if you needed to use it. Both results are very comparable, so let's move on to the next test. The next test we're going to move on to is a noise level test. Now obviously, particularly those who are in an RV or camping situation, the quieter an engine or a saw like we're using today is, the better it's going to be and the less disruptive it's going to be to the environment and to other campers in the area. So just how much quieter is a battery saw than a petrol saw? And that's what we're going to put to the test today. The way in which we're going to measure it today is by using this little device here, which is a decibel meter. This is going to give us a good indication of how loud these saws are, and it's going to be placed about 40 centimeters away from the cutting edge, right up near the saw. Now the reason we measure it right up close to the saw, as opposed to measuring things like generators where it's a distance away, is because the operator is with the machine when it's being used. Now we're going to be measuring 3 parameters today. The first one is going to be an idle, the second one is going to be full RPM with no load, and the third is going to be high load cutting through this log here. So let's see the differences between these two saws. Before we get the saw started, we note that the ambient decibel level is 29. Time to start the first test. The biggest advantage of the Ryobi is that there is no engine idle. The saw is simply turned on when we need to make that cut. Running the Ryobi at full RPM with no load, the noise level increases to 91. It's fairly loud but not overly offensive. As we make the cut, we can observe the noise level doesn't increase, if anything, decreases slightly. As we finish the cut, we are looking at about 88 decibels. Moving on to the Stihl saw. An additional measurement we need to take is the engine idle. Just starting that petrol saw, we see the level increase up to 97. This is louder than the Ryobi saw at full RPM. Running the Stihl at maximum RPM without any load, we see that level increase all the way up to 113 decibels. It is definitely noticeably louder than that of the Ryobi. As we make the cut again, we see that noise level doesn't increase but slowly decreases as the saw lowers behind the log. Finishing the cut, we see 101 decibels. So we have our results, and it's pretty hard to detect on the camera just how loud these saws are, but hopefully this little decibel meter here sort of gave you a bit of context in regards to the results of each saw. Obviously the biggest advantage for a battery operated saw is that we have no idle noise. The saw's only turned on when we're ready for cutting. But even when we did turn on at high RPM and no load, and with the cut through this log, we can see the differences between the two saws are very significant. So if you're looking for a saw that takes into consideration other people around you and you need it to be nice and quiet, maybe the Ryobi battery saw is the one for you. So I headed off to cut up my supply of wood. I cut through numerous logs in and around the area and managed to collect quite the stock. I ran all of my 5 batteries through the saw. The old batteries definitely didn't last as long. However, my goal here was to place the motor under strain, running it for about 45 minutes with limited rest time. So it's been a couple of hours now. I've managed to cut all of this wood here just using this 18-volt Ryobi saw, which I find very impressive. Now, the majority of this wood is Jarrah hardwood. There are some other types in here as well, but we've also got the test cuts that we did from earlier. So we would have a few more logs if we used this saw to cut some logs rather than some test pieces for those performance and noise tests. Now saying this is where we find one of the limitations of the Ryobi saw. Although this is a lot of wood here, this is a total of 5 batteries. There's a bit of a mix and match of types and age of batteries used, but that's a lot of batteries. And while I stuck the first battery on charge as soon as it cooled down, I could grab the petrol chainsaw and continue with some more cutting. Now in about an hour and a half to 2 hours of cutting with the Stihl saw, I managed to cut a lot more wood. Not because of the limitation of the saws, but because of the limitation of the battery life and the time to recharge. When the Stihl saw runs out of juice, I'm able to fill it up with a new tank of fuel, fill that bar oil up, give it a quick field sharpen and straight back out. Whereas this one here took about 20 to 30 minutes for the first battery just to cool down, enough for me to put it onto charge. So although great for getting some wood on the side of the track, if you're looking for a saw to grab a trailload of wood for your winter stock, it's not going to be the way to go. So this is not the first time I've taken this saw out, and I've previously separated the wood I've cut into piles per battery. So to give you an idea of the battery life per cuts, this collection here is one 6 amp hour high performance battery. This collection here is another single 6 amp hour high performance battery. This one here is a 4 amp hour regular battery. And finally, the 3 larger logs are from 2 of my 5-year-old 5 amp hour regular batteries. I split the wood that I had cut and began to load the trailer. This is a good amount of wood. It doesn't quite fill the 7x5 trailer, but very impressive for such a small battery operated saw. So I've spent the last little while splitting the wood that I have collected so far. While doing that and using the petrol chainsaw, I've had one of the batteries on the Ryobi charging up in the vehicle. So now that one battery's charged up, I thought, hey, let's do one more test and just see how big a log this saw can cut through. Got this one here solid all the way through. We can see that it's bigger than the bar on the chainsaw in every dimension. So we're looking at a 12-inch bar with 10 inches of that exposed as a cutting surface, and we cut through this log. So right cutting technique and a bit of time. Very impressively, we've cut all the way through this log. So realistically, not something you probably do with a battery saw, but just another reason I'm starting to like this Ryobi. Finishing up, and we're ready to head back home. Considering that I purchased this unit for travel and specifically its compact nature, I thought I'd share a couple of accessories that I've purchased that are going to make life on the road with this tool much more convenient. Out of the box, the Ryobi saw comes with this plastic chain guard, which is essential to protect the chain and all of your belongings when storing and packing it. Given the nature of the four-wheel driving and touring that I do, I need a little more than just a chain guard. The first accessory I bought for this store was this plastic drip tray. It doesn't matter how much you want to believe it, any chainsaw with automatic bar oil feeds will leak bar oil when stored. This super simple plastic tray allows the saw to sit on these raised ridges and is secured by the elastic strap. This means the saw won't leak through your storage area or storage case. Further, the raised ridges means that the saw doesn't sit in its own oil, so when you pull it out next time, it won't be dripping and creating a mess. FYI, this tray is also suitable for the Stihl saws if you're interested in that. The next accessory I purchased was this PVC bag, specifically designed and manufactured for saws by a company called Kelmat. This bag is awesome. Opening up long ways is the perfect size for a saw like this and fits the Stihl sharpener, a few other files and tools, safety glasses, gloves, bar oil, and keeping your saw and all of its gear together and protected. Simply zipping it up, the grab handles make it super easy to have your saw out and in use in no time when you're next out on the tracks. Now I'll be sure to leave links in the description of this video for these accessories that are sure going to make your life a lot cleaner and more convenient when using these tools out on the road. Well, this little Ryobi has sure impressed me. The speed and RPM of this saw is very comparable to a small petrol saw. Although not quite as quick as the Stihl in some of those tests, it's definitely not far behind. I think the advantages of a battery operated saw like this are obvious. The small, compact nature of this, plus the fact that the power source being the batteries can be used for a wide range of tools. Not to mention the fact we don't have to mix two-stroke fuel and oil together just to get our camp supply worth of firewood. Now, this being said, if you're someone who has to fill up that trailer for your winter supply worth of firewood, then you're going to have to remain with the petrol-powered chainsaws, unless you want to spend thousands of dollars on batteries for a unit like this. Now, coming back to my opening statement, do I think that a product like this is a value for money, specifically for the traveling camper? And the answer is absolutely. This Ryobi chainsaw is definitely being added to my gear list. It is cleaner, quieter, lighter, doesn't give off those petrol fumes, and I'm not looking for a machine to fill a trailer worth of firewood. I'm just looking for something that can cut the odd tree off the track, or perhaps collect enough firewood for a night or two out camping, and this little unit here certainly does that job. There are certainly more powerful battery operated chainsaws on the market, and in fact, Ryobi themselves offer an 18-inch 36 volt chainsaw, but this comes in at a whopping $449, and that's not including the $380 you'd have to spend on a new battery and charger. Keeping in mind that this battery wouldn't work with the rest of my tools, not a very efficient choice for my setup. This little unit, however, is going to be just perfect. So guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you managed to get some useful information from it, and I provided some information that may be able to help you decide whether or not a unit like this is going to be right for your setup. Regardless, I hope to see you in the next episode. Cheers.